have you convinced yourself that you would buy your product? Because if you haven't convinced yourself that you would buy your product, you're not going to convince anybody else to buy your product either.
Stefan Lugo is a business development representative at Bearworks, an AI-powered sales platform that helps B2B teams with parallel dialing, virtual sales floors, and coaching tools integrated into Salesforce and HubSpot. Before this, he's been a BDR at 4 different SaaS companies in just 2 years. And he's also a BJJ brown belt and a former registered behavioral technician working with children on the spectrum. A pretty special treat for our audience today, something very different. And we'll be talking about what you actually learn when you compress multiple BDR roles into a short time frame, the pattern recognition that comes from seeing different outbound motion, the meta dynamics of selling to sales team as a practitioner, and how skills from martial arts and behavioral therapy translate into reading prospects and handling objections. This is Are You Getting More? Buckle up for another amazing episode. Stefan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Lisa, for having me. I'm really excited to be on the show today. And let's rock and roll.
Well, you've been a BDR at 4 different companies in just 2 years, which is actually a really interesting vantage point. You get to see how different SaaS companies structure their outbound motion. What's the pattern you've noticed in what separates companies where BDRs actually hit quota versus where they're just burning some reps?
I think the main difference that I've noticed is a combination of leadership and also a combination of the sequences, the day-to-day practices that each rep needs to be, taking accountable for, and also good data. Good data. I think that's a
Sure.
very, very important value prop that we don't think about too much. I guess we don't account for it too much when it comes to the BDR role or maybe the BDR management. Because you can hire a BDR, it can be really, really good. But if you give them a list that's not too qualified, it's going to give that BDR, that rep, a lot of trouble to book those meetings and to find those people, those conversations that you want to have to begin with. So it's a combination of leadership, your sequences, which is the day-to-day processes of your BDR. What are they doing from the moment they get up to the moment they open their laptop? They're going on LinkedIn first. Are they sending a message? Are they doing prospecting? Are they emailing? Are they doing cold calls right from the beginning? It can be a combination, a mix of both. Me personally, I like to use the combination of LinkedIn and cold calls. And so I find that's the most direct way nowadays to reach potential clients or partners. Email seems to be fading away a little bit. I'm not saying it's not efficient as a source to reach new clients, new partners. And you got AI now coming into the picture, which is very tricky nowadays because we've tried to personalize everything without sounding like a robot. I want to make sure that you're speaking with someone who is a human being and not someone who just, kind of copy and pasted something that AI would have brought up online.
I completely agree with you with LinkedIn versus email. LinkedIn is like the place to reach out to your clients now. I don't know when that shift happened, but it's definitely very evident.
Yeah, so I feel like LinkedIn just came over, just kind of take over. And I think everyone kind of collectively understood like, hey, you know what? We could just contact each other right here and there.
Now, you went from the espresso company to Simera, to Bemo, and now to Bearworks. That's a lot of transitions in a very compressed time frame. What did you learn about evaluating a BDR role during the interview process that you wish you'd known before your first one?
I was so fortunate to start with Simera because I feel like they had a good processes, their leadership, the training that I received from that job really helped me throughout every other, BDR gig that I've had. When I went to Espresso, what I realized is that there was a lack of experience within the BDR role to begin with. Because I entered to being part of the founding business development team. And there was just a lack of experience and a lack of tools. The most success I have had was when, first and foremost, you understood what you're selling. And not only that you understood what you're selling, but you would buy it yourself. Have you convinced yourself that you would buy your product? Because if you haven't convinced yourself that you would buy your product, you're not going to convince anybody else to buy your product either, you know?
Good
And
point.
so
Yes.
that's definitely one thing I would have wished I would have thought about beforehand. After Samara, I figured that I got some sort of talents for this role. And, here in Managua, Nicaragua,
Mhm.
everyone knows everybody, it's a small country. And so the
Yes.
word went around that there's a guy who's, American Nicaraguan who speaks English pretty well and he's great at cold calling. Let's see what we can do. And that's how I kind of got the job at Espresso. CEO reached out to me and he had heard about me on LinkedIn and he's like, "Hey man, let's have a conversation, this and that." And boom, I got the job. And it wasn't because I was on bad terms with Samara. It was because they had received this opportunity to be a founding member of their BDR team, which they wanted me to lead. So, but then I went in there and it's like the tools, the processes, who's gonna,
Mm.
I need all this support. I don't have any of this that I had in Samara. And it's kind of like I had my back against the wall, which became difficult. And then after
Okay.
BMO, I had this awesome opportunity to work with Bearworks. And Bearworks has been the best experience by far.
How long have you been with Bearworks?
Over a little over a year now, a little over a year
Okay.
now. The tools are great. I love the tools. Shout out to Apollo and our tool, which I use all the time, every time.
You mentioned working with children on the spectrum as a registered behavioral technician. And on a completely different side of things, you are also a BJJ brown belt who's competed in MMA. That's amazing. I've dabbled in BJJ myself, and it's a fascinating world that I respect very highly. But both of these fields of yours require reading people, staying calm under pressure for sure, and also adapting your approach. How has that background of yours shaped how you handle objections or difficult conversations in sales?
And that's an awesome question, Lisa. Both very different environments, right? But between the martial arts and, I compete as well and I have fought in the cage compared to, working one on one with, therapeutically with a child that's under the
Mhm.
spectrum. You do have to be patient, of course. And you
Of
do,
course.
I think the most important thing is understanding the setting and what you're getting yourself into. Because I understand there's people who just don't have patience to deal with kids, period. I love kids. I've been working with kids ever since years before I got into being a behavioral technician. When it was presented to me, I was like, okay, cool. I'd like to try this out just to see what it would be like. And it was an awesome experience. And to the MMA and the jiu-jitsu, how's that helped me nowadays? What I tell people is, listen, man, if you've been able to be brave enough to get into a cage to fight someone who's gonna literally try to take your head off for 15 minutes, there's nothing over the phone that anyone can tell you that should bring you any kind of fear that could bring something that's
Mm.
even correlated to that feeling. Objections, I don't take them personally. I rely on how much I prepared myself on the knowledge of my own platform to deal with objections, right? And of course, the confidence, you get it from martial arts, most likely, I would say.
What's scarier, getting on a sales call or getting in a cage for a fight?
It's tough, it's both. They're both scary. I would say a sales call, to be honest. I would say a
I'm
sales
not
call is a little scary.
surprised.
Yeah, no,
I'm
100%,
not
because
surprised.
a lot happens in that little bit of time that you have in a sales call,
Mhm.
right? And that 30 seconds that you have to grab that person's attention, that's all you have. That's all you have to win the game. In a fight, at least you get punched a few times. All right, you feel the punches, you can keep going a little bit. So you still have a little bit of chance. Doing the cold calls, I feel like that's where people have the most fear when it comes to doing this job, which is actually the thing I like to do most.
At Bearworks, you're selling AI-powered sales tools to sales teams. So you're essentially selling to people who do what you do. What have you learned about that kind of a meta dynamic? Does being a practitioner change how you position the product?
Absolutely. Definitely helps to sell something that you use every day. And if you like
Of
what you use
course.
every day, it's easy to sell even then. I've gotten so used to the processes when it comes to being a BDR, the cold calling, the cold emails, the follow-ups, the cold LinkedIn outreach, the connections, the ICP, reaching out to specific people depending on the industry you're working in, for specific positions, finding these people on LinkedIn, using other platforms and using all the tools that you have at your disposal to your advantage. I understand that very well nowadays. So to me, to sell Bearworks for me is a tool that I know has helped many other teams, and it helps me on a daily basis. So for me, it's very easy to sell a tool that I use as a BDR to other BDRs or to other business development teams.
That sums it up in a nutshell. That's beautiful. Absolutely. It sounds like you need to understand the product, but also love the product.
Just understand the products and appreciate the product. I don't think being a BDR is the funnest job in the world. So you might not be able to find a reason to love what you do, but as long as you can appreciate what you do, we're helping other teams facilitate their processes and their enablement when it comes to working with their own teams. I feel like when you find the appreciation for things, it's easy to share it with others, and hopefully they'll appreciate it as well.
Of course. And now you've seen both the startup side and now you're at a company with enterprise CRM integrations. When you're prospecting, what's the mistake that you see other BDRs making when they try to book meetings with sales leaders?
I think in the very beginning, when someone doesn't have experience and they want to get into the role, right? And they're like, maybe they're just like, man, how do I get into, just into the job market to begin with? Because the BDR role, believe it or not, is an entry role.
Right. Yeah.
And I wish I would have known about this opportunity a good 10 years ago. Maybe I would have gotten a super head start on this career.
I think
But
things might have been a little different 10 years
a
ago,
little different, a
though.
little different. Look, let's say by 2020, right? Wish I would have known
Mhm.
probably by like 2020
Sure.
about this role, and I would have been more interested. I would have dug more into this. But the biggest issue that I see that new BDRs do is they try to pad their stats, as we say in the sports world. Pad their stats. Hey, as long as it looks good, I'm booking on the meeting book sheet to my manager, I'm gonna be good, right? Because all I gotta do is book meetings. That's right, right? Okay, no, that's not right. You have to book qualified meetings, and that's why one thing that I learned afterwards is that if your meetings are not qualified, it's basically like you just wasted your time on that prospect.
Speaking of reaching out to people and qualifying customers, how do you qualify a customer and decide that this is the qualified customer that I need to talk to
Right.
versus I can see right away that this is just going to be a polite call that I need to end quickly?
Right, no, 100%. First and foremost, we got to build the list, right? And then depending
Hmm.
on the
Hmm.
platform that you're using, you should be able to build a strong list, which is going to tell you that person's job title, how many people are in that company. These are things that I look for specifically on the platform that I use. Their buying
Which
intent,
is which
which is Apollo. Shout out to
Apollo.
Apollo.
Okay.
Anyways, the buying intent, if they're hiring or not. Why do I look if they're hiring or not? Because if they're hiring at the moment, they might be willing to bring on new tools, or maybe they have funds to bring on new tools at that moment. So that's something else that I look for. And then we build the ICP, right? Like, what industries specifically are we looking for? For us, basically, hey, if you have a business development team or a sales team that does outreach, we want to talk to you. We want to see how we can help you do that outreach a lot easier and how to facilitate your teamwork together. And yeah, it's just a matter of, getting down with your team and saying, hey, look, these are the people that we're reaching out to. For me, I do not waste my time reaching out to low hanging fruit. What do I call low hanging fruit? It's like a gatekeeper, right? It's the specific word
Hmm.
that we use in the business development realm, which is probably someone who works at the front desk, like, hey, da da da. Someone who's just
Hmm.
like basically taking a message, which, if you've been in this role before, in most cases, it leads to nothing, right? They tell you, yeah, I'll leave them a message, or you just tell me who's calling, or you want to send an
Sure, sure. We've
email.
we've all done that job at some point in our careers. We
We've
know how
all
it
done that
works.
job, and we all know what happens. And so, yeah, just qualifying your leads. I think that's the biggest difference.
Awesome. Now, you mentioned you're a certified Seven Cups listener, and you have this natural enthusiasm for learning from diverse groups. And a lot of sales training focuses on assertiveness and persistence, but listening, I feel, is underrated. In fact, I'm reading a book right now called The Lost Art of Listening, and I'm finding it very fascinating and kind of dreading the fact that they didn't teach us this stuff in high school and college. What's your take on how active listening rather than speaking actually moves deals forward versus, just being a nice soft skill?
I'm not sure if you
Mhm.
heard about Seven Cups, but what the platform does is basically you're an open ear to people who are dealing with, serious issues in their life. and they're just
Mhm.
basically go on the platform to kind of just let themselves express themselves how they ever they want. And my job was to never respond. I could never give them. I could respond, but I can never give them advice to what to do in life. Like so, that was like a awesome way to like be an active listener, right? Because most of the times when we have conversations, we speak to respond and don't and not speak to listen. So
Mhm.
that's been a big difference, especially nowadays when you're in sales. Apart from your pitch in the beginning, if you have a solid pitch, awesome. I think I have a solid pitch now, but after that pitch, it all depends on how my prospect's going to respond or not, right? And depending on how they respond, well, all I gotta do is listen at this point because they're gonna let me know everything I need to know on their own. And that's what I've learned from active listening. That in sales too is it's the sales call is not about me. It's actually about you and how we can help you and what's your day looking like nowadays compared to how you want it to look next week, next month, next
Mhm.
year, and how we can reach to that point together.
Awesome. You mentioned advising people. If you were advising someone in their first BDR role at a B2B SaaS company, what's the one thing you would tell them to focus on in their first, let's say, 90 days that most people
Okay,
overlook?
perfect. Yeah. I would say be patient and persistent. Be like a sponge. Like be willing to absorb as much knowledge as possible. And don't be too hard on yourself because it's not an easy job. It's not an easy job and not everybody wants to do it. Not everyone wants to get up every day and be like, all right, I'm gonna reach out to 50 to 100 people, strangers that I never talked to in my life. They probably never heard about me or our company, depending if you're working on a startup or not. Maybe they've never even heard about your company. And I'm going to try to figure out and convince them to hop on board with us somehow today. And that's it's not easy. Know what you're getting yourself into. Be smart, man. Just be smart. At some point, you're gonna have to sell something in your life, and having that sales skill is super important, whether you're a employee or business owner.
Yeah, that actually comes up quite a lot on this podcast, regardless of who I'm speaking with. We always end up on this one sentence that we all agree on that in a company, everyone is in sales, no
Right.
matter what your role is. We're all really in sales. You've got this unique combination, as we talked about, of a martial arts discipline, working with diverse populations, and now multiple reps in the BDR trenches. If you had to distill all of that into just one principle that guides how you approach business development, what would that be?
I love martial arts piece. Like, it's just like part of like my identity, very profound in my soul, that I'm a martial artist before even a sales guy. One thing that I found that I needed it in both to succeed is discipline. Because not every day I wanted to go train, Lisa. Not every day I want to get up and get my butt kicked. But I understand that it's the discipline that I need to get up and like kind of crash through these plateaus in our minds. Tell us like, hey, you need to do this. Regardless of how you feel, find the appreciation in the job that you do, find the worth in the job that you do, and do it. That's it. It could be way worse. And I understand that it could be way worse. I live in Nicaragua, so I can see with my own eyes every day how much worse it could be. And just learning to appreciate the situations. But yeah, discipline, Lisa, discipline.
Discipline. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for coming on our show. Thank you for giving us yet another beautiful perspective on sales and business growth. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Lisa, so much for having me on the show.
And if any of you listening want to connect with our guest today and find out what they're doing over at Bearworks, link is in the description. We'll see you next time. This has
See you
been
guys.
Are You Getting More?